fate of your relationship, whether it ends in divorce, breakups, will depend on your attachment style. Your attachment style dictates how you deal with conflict, how you deal with emotions and fears, and how you deal with your partner and intimacy. And there are 4 attachment styles. And guaranteed you have at least one of these 4 attachment styles, so let's get into it. So first, we want to look at the anxious attachment. It's probably one of the most popular attachment styles. These are the behaviors of them. Behaviors. They can be very clingy or needy, right? So they want lots of communication. They want to get closer to you, more intimacy, more future plans with you, right? They really want to be with you and close to you as often as possible and as close as possible. Big overthinkers, especially when it comes to text messages, emails, or even just in person. They're very quick to notice any change in facial expression, vocal tone, and so on. Whether they're communicating with you one-on-one, online, or whatever, they're very quick to know if something seems off. And a very strong demand for constant reassurance, right? So that need that everything's okay. That when they respond to you, that you respond back to them. That when you go somewhere, they know when you arrive there, right? It's just this reassurance that you care, that you love. It's this incessant, fearful need for constant reassurance that you still love them, that you still care about them, that the relationship is okay, right? And that requires a lot of communication back and forth. And being alone is very scary, right? We're going to talk about abandonment in a bit, but they experience a lot of that growing up as a child. And so when they experience it again today, very, very scary. We're going to go much deeper into it, but they have a big fear of being alone or being left. And then the behavior that overlaps with a lot of these other behaviors is panic if you pull away. So if you disengage, you get quiet, you physically walk off, or you don't answer your messages and you're just not responsive, this kind of pulling away really panics and scares the hell out of somebody that has an anxious attachment. Okay, moving on to the thoughts that people with anxious attachment have. So they have very repetitive thought patterns. And those thought patterns might be, did I do something wrong? Also, why haven't they replied back? Right? If I'm not enough, they'll leave. And also, right, this is my last chance. This is my last chance at love. We're so good together. If I lose them, oh no, doom and gloom. I don't know if I'll ever feel in love again with someone this special, right? They oftentimes idolize their partner to their own detriment. So what we want to go to next is, what are the core fears, right? Because there is fear that dictates all of these behaviors and these thoughts. So let's go deeper. As I hinted at earlier, there's a deep fear of abandonment, right? That's the fear of being left. While when you pull away, there's this emotional hijacking that happens. Like, oh no, I'm going to be abandoned as if they were a child again. So abandonment is very huge, right? And then also being too much or not enough. Big fear of not being worthy enough for your love. Fear that love can be taken away without warning. It's a big one. And this part right here, right, without warning, like it could just leave any moment, is what fuels their fear. And it also fuels their hypervigilance, because that's exactly what they experience in childhood. In fact, we will talk about childhood next. So all this stuff is not just them being unreasonable. There's a reason why someone with an anxious attachment is like this. It's because they experience this abandonment and this pain of not getting their needs met, of being not good enough, unworthy. They experienced it first through their childhood. Parents were inconsistent, right? Sometimes they were warm, sometimes they were cold, sometimes they were there, sometimes they were not, whether they're emotionally or physically, right? It was very inconsistent, and they could never count on their parents to be there when they wanted them to be. And coming back to this one, love had to be earned. And if they weren't the good son or the good daughter, or they made a mistake, or they did something that the parents disapproved of, boom, love is pulled away. So they have to try so hard to get love, get attention. And even then, it never really felt like it was good enough. So emotionally unsafe. And so what that means is that if they expressed needs, those needs were rejected, those needs were judged, dismissed, right? Whether it's needs or emotions, right? They received a lot of dismissal, judgment, neglect of their feelings, of their needs, and even of their desire for closeness, consistency, certainty from their parents. So a childhood like this is going to train someone with anxious attachment to be very hypervigilant, to try to overdo things to try to avoid rejection, avoid abandonment. The idea of you leaving them is the biggest fear, and it sends them into panic, overthinking, and emotional overwhelm. Okay, so let's zoom back out and go to the second super popular attachment style, and that is the avoidant attacher, right? The person that does the opposite of the anxious attacher. They avoid. If anything, they want less intimacy. They want a lot of space, whereas the person that's the anxiously attached, they want to close that space as tight as possible. So we have the opposite right here. So let's look at their behaviors. So when things get scary, when things get very intimate, they do the opposite of the anxious attacher. attacher. So when things get stressful, they pull away, they shut down, they get quiet. The main triggers for someone that is avoidant is when they have a partner that wants to communicate more, that wants more of them, that wants more closeness, that starts to talk about future plans, that wants to just, talk about vulnerable emotions. Those things are what stresses an avoidant attacher out, and the way they respond by that is pulling away. So they'll either physically pull away, they'll emotionally pull away, they'll stop communicating, they'll get more quiet, they might even just lie and people please and just say stuff to make the anxious person happy, but really they're trying to avoid more conflict. It's just this general retreating inside, not just physically but emotionally. The other extremely popular behavior is that they need a lot of space. These two behaviors go together, right? So pulling away to create space, right? They like space because in space they feel safer. The anxiously attached tries to feel safe by closing the space, getting closer to you. The avoidant attacher feels safe by getting away. And so that can be like getting away and isolating or distracting themselves with work, entertainment, going off somewhere else by themselves, right? They want that space to feel safe. Keep in mind, these are trauma responses. It comes from fear. We'll go into that soon enough. So they hate vulnerable, emotional conversations. We'll go into why that is with the childhood and so on. But when it comes to being emotional, when it comes to sharing emotions, feelings, fears, whether it's their own or trying to hear and listen to your feelings and fears and whatever that you have, all of that is very overwhelming. It's very uncomfortable. And the reason why it's uncomfortable is it evokes fear of shame, judgment, rejection, and so on. Those kind of fears come up. And we'll talk about that again very soon. So they hate emotional conversations. So they instead prefer logic over emotions. Logic is a big one here because it's easier for them to think through things as opposed to feel through things. They want things to be rational, logical, straightforward. They treat life like a math problem very oftentimes. And so remember that emotions are very uncomfortable, overwhelming. It reminds them of shame, blame, being alone, being rejected, being judged. So much negative association with feeling emotions, whether it's themselves or someone else's. So logic is a lot easier, a lot safer. Another huge one, they're hyper independent. So what does that mean? They're independent because they just prefer to figure everything out on their own. They don't want to rely on other people. They don't want to ask for help. They oftentimes feel like relying on someone, asking for help makes you weak. And it reminds them of all the times growing up that when they were vulnerable, when they did have needs and needed help, they were, again, there's punishment. They're disappointed, they're rejected, they're judged for it. There's some negative association with asking for help and trying to depend on other people. And so they cope with this by being hyper independent. I'm just going to figure it out on my own since no one can be there for me anyways. And they create an identity around that. And then they also judge people who are vulnerable, always asking for help, and that kind of thing. So there's many ways that they kind of cope with this pain. So either way, one of the biggest hallmarks for what makes someone an avoidant is this hyper independence, right? Always trying to be the lone wolf and figure it out on their own, do life on their own, right? So let's get into how does an avoidant person think? So the thoughts of the avoidant attacher. Let's get into it. The first one is going to be very obvious based on everything we just said, is that I don't need anyone. Also, feelings make you weak for all the reasons above that we just talked about. So people will let you down anyway. Why rely on people if they're going to let you down, right? That's the thinking that they have. And these thoughts, as you can tell, are tied to beliefs. And these beliefs are tied to pain. This is also a very big one. If I get too close, I'll lose freedom. I'll lose my independence. I'll lose my ability to fulfill my needs, because closeness means commitment, means obligation, means like potential enmeshment. We'll talk about enmeshment very soon. They associate closeness with more pain, actually, right? More commitment, more closeness with pain, because that's exactly what they experienced in childhood. The person closest to them caused them a lot of pain. So we've already been talking about some fears, but let's get right into it. What are their core fears? Because there's a reason why they do all this stuff that seems to be, not always logical, right? A lot of fear behind it. So what are those fears? A big one right here is being controlled, smothered, because that means they could lose their independence. That means that they can't exercise their will to pursue their needs. So losing freedom, very huge for them. Fear of depending on people, because if they depend on people, they could be hurt, they could be betrayed, they could be rejected, shamed, blamed, let down, and also abandoned. Even avoidance have a fear of abandonment. They just have an opposite way of dealing with that. Better to leave you than for you to leave them. That's the strategy. You see that? All right, let's get into childhood. This is a good one, right? They had critical and dismissive parents. Had to suppress emotions to feel safe. So they had to suppress emotions. It's not a choice. That's one thing to keep in mind. These are not choices. There's a fear that tells them like, nope, you have to suppress your emotions. There's no way you can do otherwise, because if you have emotions, if you have needs, if you express those needs and emotions, you're gonna be met with more pain. So better to suppress to avoid more pain. The attachment system that we have is a direct coping and adaptation to a childhood of neglect, abandonment, abuse, and so on. All right, so let's zoom out. We got 2 mystery boxes here. We're going to go to the third one, and that is the disorganized attachment. So let's look at their behaviors. The interesting thing with someone that's disorganized is that they are a very strong mix of very strong anxious attachment behaviors and fears, as well as very strong avoidant attachment behaviors and fears. So this is going to look like push and pull. They push intimacy and people away. That's the avoidant part of them. And they pull relationships in. That's the anxious part, right? So they do a mix of push-pull. So it really feels like a roller coaster with someone like this. So they both crave and fear intimacy, right? Extreme highs and lows. So for someone that's disorganized, the highs are very high, right? When the joy is there, the pleasure, the love, the fun, it's very high. But when it's bad, it feels like depression. It just feels like hopelessness. It just feels very stressful when it gets down low. All right, huge trust issues. They don't trust anyone. Very unpredictable behavior. This is the kind of person that can very quickly snap and get very angry very quickly. Or go from happy to mad, right? Oscillating through these emotions very quickly. And disorganized attachers, all the attachment systems can do this behavior, but disorganized attachers, they unconsciously find reasons to fight, to make something wrong, to create a drama. And they do this, again, we're going to get to that in a bit, because drama and chaos makes them feel home again. So they want to recreate their childhood environment. I mean, all the attachment styles do this. They try to recreate what's familiar. But, this is really special to the disorganized, where they just try to recreate the chaos that they grew up in. So the next curiosity is, how does a disorganized attacher think? Right? What kind of thoughts run their life? Love hurts. That's exactly what they experience in childhood. So they have this narrative, love hurts. Can't trust anyone, right? Not even myself. And here's a big one. If I get too close, I'll be destroyed. It's even worse than simply just being hurt. Is like they'll just be utterly obliterated, destroyed. Like it's just gonna be a big black hole of destruction for them. So there's a lot of terror with being close to people. That is also matched by the terror of being abandoned and being left, right? So it's really a painful conundrum that people with disorganized attachment have. And so their fears are very predictable, right? They fear being betrayed, but also abandoned or abused. The disorganized attacher can be both the one that fears being abused, but also can be the abuser, emotionally, physically, verbally, those kind of things, right? This is the trauma response. This is the fight response when they feel overwhelmed, when they're scared. Fear of being close, because if I'm close, I'm going to hurt, right? So a lot of these are overlapping. And they also fear being seen. This is a big one, because when they had attention of their parents on them, it usually was associated with pain, guilt, shame, being attacked verbally, yelled at, screamed at. It's just negative attention when eyes are on them. So they are so scared of being truly seen for all of them, because again, they associate it with pain, right? So fear of being seen, fear of being rejected as well. They experience a lot of that growing up. I mean, most of the attachment styles has a fear of that, but the disorganized has a very large mixed bag of both. All right, so let's talk about their childhood, all right? What causes someone to be so chaotic and just push-pull with so much highs and lows? Like, what causes someone to be that way? Well, you bet your ass it is going to be about their childhood. So childhood, terrifying parents. Where does all the shame, abuse, rejection, abandonment, where does that come from? It comes from their parents. Parents did this, and these are very terrifying parents, right? So scared to have them leave you, but so scared to have their attention, to even be around them. So these are very abusive and neglectful parents. They experience abuse, neglect, chaos, really the full range of very unsafe and scary, terrifying, painful feelings growing up. So love mixed with fear. It's a very sad thing when the parents that are the source of your safety is also the source of your pain and suffering. So like they feed you, they shelter you, they kind of take care of you, but they completely neglect and reject your emotional needs. They oftentimes abuse you, they terrorize you, you're just on edge, scared of their reaction. So it's like they keep you alive, but they also make you feel extremely unsafe. So the parents are the source of safety and danger. Very underdeveloped nervous system. A nervous system that's constantly in fight, flight, and freeze. Also fawn too. It's not as commonly talked about, right? So fawning is like people pleasing. All right, so that's a disorganized attacher, a mix of avoidant and anxious together. In fact, all of us have a mix of attachment styles. Like for example, I used to be more predominantly avoidant and maybe a little bit of anxious and secure attachment. We'll talk about the secure attachment next. You know, we're not 100% one thing. We're primarily one attachment style and a little bit of the other stuff sprinkled in. So yeah, so let's go to the unicorn, right? The secure attacher. And I say this is the unicorn because the secure person, the 100% secure, healed, the person that has no issues, it doesn't exist. There are people that are more secure. There are people that are learning how to become secure, but that like 100% secure person does not exist because, you know, we're human. It's good to know the behaviors because we are all here to aspire, to learn, to grow and heal, to become that secure person. And so what that looks like is very open communication. They're able to express their emotions, their needs, and their thoughts openly. And they are also open to the thoughts, needs, and emotions of the other person. It goes both ways. It's an easy, free-flowing, two-way street. Setting their own boundaries of what they need and respecting other people's boundaries is easy. It's a normal and expected thing, but they're also flexible. So sometimes those boundaries are, you know, very rigid in certain areas, but other times maybe their boundaries are, depending on the situation, a little bit more fluid. So they're able to be strong or flexible with their boundaries depending on what they need, depending on the situation. So they're not just like all rigid in one way. They're very flexible when they can be, when they want to be. Comfortable with closeness and space. Right? So that's very key. They're okay if there's some space. They're okay if their partner pulls away. It's not the worst, scariest thing in the world. But they're also okay if their partner perhaps needs a little bit more closeness, a little bit more intimacy, right? They can easily free flow between those two things. They don't rush to panic. They don't rush to overthinking. They don't rush to shutting down, getting quiet, or rushing to get angry and attacking and, you know, needy, controlling. You know, they don't do those anxious and avoidant things. But they do ultimately seek connection without the panic. This is a key thing here. Because we are human beings, regardless of childhood and trauma, just being human, we have a natural animal social desire to connect with one another. So they do seek connection. They're not like the hyper-independent avoidance. They seek connection, but there's not a fear behind it. They're actually very confident and patient that they'll get the connections that they'll have, and they'll meet the people that they'll need to meet, and they'll fall in love with who they'll fall in love with. But they do seek it out. They just don't have this panic whether they're going to get it or not, and they don't try too hard for it. So thoughts of the person that is secure. How do they think? Because this is a very important one to take in. So you know what to eventually aspire to with some training, practice, and a lot of healing. They'll have thoughts like, I can rely on others and others can rely on me. Also, it's okay to be vulnerable. And conflict does not mean rejection. So these are very obviously confident, secure type of thoughts. Very different from the anxious person, very different from the avoidant person, very, very, very different than disorganized person. So let's look at their fears, right? Or perhaps a lack of fears that the other attachment styles have. They are still human. They have milder versions of the other attachment styles. They don't want to be abandoned. They don't want to be betrayed. They don't want to be attacked, suffocated, controlled. All the avoidant and anxious fears, but it's a lot more mild. It doesn't consume them. And the key thing is that they don't try to avoid it, or even if those things happen, like they get betrayed, they get left, they get, you know, judged or blamed, it's not the end of the world. They're going to be okay. They're going to get to the other side of it. Right? They know that they can overcome the fears. That's the key thing. The big one too is they're not fixated on the worst case scenario. Oh no, what if they abandon me? Or no, oh, what if I get too close and they'll smother me, right? Or control me and I'll lose myself. They don't worry about the worst case scenario, which is very opposite to the person that's avoidant, anxious, or disorganized. So in order for someone that has secure attachment to develop in this way, they had a very good childhood. And that childhood looked like this. This is a big one. Consistent and responsive caregivers. Parents. They were consistently there emotionally and physically. They weren't always working or distracted or fighting each other, right? They're just consistently present. A safe presence, right? Which is very key because that is, they felt safe expressing needs and emotions. This is key right here, is they could really express their vulnerability. They could express when they're scared. They could express when they're angry or having a tantrum, and the parents wouldn't punish them. They wouldn't overreact. They wouldn't ignore them. They wouldn't dismiss them or tell them how they should feel. Instead, they just gave space for them to feel the emotions and validate, like, oh, it's okay to be angry. Tell me more about that. What's going on here, right? They try to get curious. The parents will try to get curious why the child is having the emotional experience or, whatever it is. They also learn that people can be reliable and safe. Now, I don't know about you, but I haven't heard of someone that had a childhood that was perfect like this. Maybe sometimes like this, but other times not. The parents were fighting and getting divorced, or they're just yelling, and it's just drama. It doesn't feel safe. I wouldn't get fixated on this because this childhood in this kind of perfect, consistent way, it does not exist. In fact, it's impossible for a childhood like this to exist because, again, you just got to open up a history book and see how much stress, turmoil, war, famine, disease, prejudice, slavery. There's so much. Humans are very terrible to each other, right? Every history book, every continent has a history of suffering. And so it's impossible to create a perfect environment considering what humans do to each other to make it perfectly secure childhood. And there's always like some stuff, some challenge. The thing is like, it's not about wishing that you had something like this. It's just realizing that you had a childhood that made you anxious. You had a childhood that made you avoidant later on in life or disorganized, right? And we're here to see it, to acknowledge it, and now do the work to fix it. In fact, that's the biggest thing here, is that everything we just discussed with the 4 attachment styles is just a gateway to then doing the work to change these beliefs, to release these pains and emotions from childhood so that we can all of us together become more and more secure. The biggest thing that you have to understand is that just understanding intellectually what your attachment styles are is not enough to change the attachment style. Even though you're anxious or avoidant or you're a mix, you're disorganized or whatever mix that you are, knowing it will not change it. And there's 2 reasons why. Number 1 is that there's a nervous system response associated with each of these attachment styles. And that's a fear response, right? It's the amygdala. When, for example, if you're the anxious person and your partner is pulling away, your amygdala activates and it regresses. It tells you like, oh, you're about to be abandoned in the same way you did when you were 5 years old. And it hijacks your prefrontal cortex, right? Your rational, logical brain that can know better. It hijacks it, shuts it down, and it puts you into what's called a fight or flight response. So if they pull away, if you're anxious, you might go into a fight response, right? You might grasp harder. You might communicate harder. You might beg harder. You might get more emotional, get angry, get very sad. You're expressing a lot of energy emotionally and so on in hopes to try to control the situation and get them to come back to you. That's a fight response. Just one example. But you also might do other things like fawning, people pleasing, right? It just comes from a place of fear. You have to understand that. And when the fear is loud, the brain shuts down. The second reason why the intellectual understanding of this stuff is not enough is because of the subconscious. The subconscious has beliefs. For example, anxious attacher, they have a subconscious belief that I can be abandoned, that love can be pulled away any moment. That subconscious belief has to be reprogrammed. And same thing with the avoidant person. They have a subconscious belief that I am not good enough, that love equals danger, emotions equal danger and overwhelm. I'm going to be shamed and blamed and rejected, right? They have all these beliefs about what intimacy means that have to be reprogrammed. And this is much deeper than the aware, awake intellectual mind. But I do want to say that this is a first step. This video is a first step for many of you just to build that awareness. So at the very least, like, oh, I'm doing that avoidant behavior thing. I'm doing that anxious attachment thing. I'm doing that push-pull thing. Okay, it feels very uncomfortable. My emotions are coming up. What do I do with it, right? So that's where we have to do nervous system work, emotional work, and subconscious work. That's a huge video for another time, but this is just the beginning part of your journey of this is where you're at. Now, if by chance you have done the basic forms of therapy, coaching, and other programs, you've done a lot of the intellectual work already, and you're ready for deep mentorship, to do deep work, to get into the trenches for really big transformation, to again, become that secure person, then I invite you to explore my mentorship program. You simply have to click the link below, either in the description, and there will be an application process that you can go through. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.